Story 1. The Midnight Visitor. Rebecca Halloway had always loved Christmas night. Not Christmas Eve with its anticipation, not Christmas morning with its chaos of presents and wrapping paper, but Christmas night itself, that quiet, peaceful time after dinner when the excitement had faded and the world seemed to settle into a content, exhausted stillness. It was her favorite time of the entire year, that sacred space between celebration and ordinary life returning. December 25, 2019, Rebecca was spending Christmas alone for the first time in her 34 years. Her parents had retired to Arizona and were spending the holidays with her brother's family. Her own divorce had been finalized in August, and her ex-husband had the kids this year as part of their custody arrangement. Rebecca had declined invitations from friends, insisting she was fine, that she actually wanted some quiet time to herself. She'd spent the day reading, watching movies, preparing a simple but nice dinner for one. Her apartment was on the third floor of a converted warehouse building in downtown Minneapolis, one of those trendy loft spaces with exposed brick, high ceilings, and industrial fixtures. She'd moved there after the divorce, wanting something completely different from the suburban house she'd shared with her ex. The building had 12 units total, and most of her neighbors were young professionals like herself. The building was secure. Keycard access, cameras in the lobby and hallways, a doorman during business hours. By 10:47 p.m. on Christmas night, Rebecca was settling in for sleep. She'd changed into her pajamas, made herself a cup of chamomile tea, and was just finishing the last chapter of the novel she'd been reading. The apartment was quiet except for the gentle hum of the heating system and the occasional sound of traffic from the street below. Snow was falling outside her large windows, creating a peaceful winter scene. Rebecca set her book aside and was about to turn off the bedside lamp when she heard it. A sound from the living room. Not loud, just a soft creak like someone shifting their weight on the hardwood floor. She froze, listening. Old buildings made noises, she told herself, especially in winter when temperature changes caused materials to expand and contract. Nothing to worry about. Then she heard it again. Footsteps. Definite footsteps. Someone was walking slowly through her living room. Rebecca's heart began to pound. She grabbed her phone from the nightstand, her finger hovering over the emergency call button. But she hesitated. What if it was nothing? What if she called 911 and it turned out to be the building settling or a neighbor doing something that transmitted sound through the walls? She'd feel ridiculous. She stood up quietly, moving to her bedroom door, which was slightly ajar. Through the gap, she could see a sliver of the living room. The Christmas tree lights were still on. She'd left them on intentionally, because she liked falling asleep to their glow. The colored lights cast shifting shadows across the walls, and in those shadows she saw movement. Someone was standing in her living room. A figure definitely human-shaped, standing perfectly still near the windows. Rebecca couldn't make out details. The figure was backlit by the city lights coming through the windows, turning it into a dark silhouette. Pure terror flooded through her. Someone was in her apartment. Someone had broken in while she was here, while she was awake, just rooms away. Rebecca's hands shook as she dialed 911. She whispered into the phone, explaining that there was an intruder in her apartment, giving her address. The dispatcher stayed on the line, asking questions in a calm, professional voice. Could she get to a room with a lock? Was the intruder aware she was there? Did she know how they'd entered? Rebecca backed away from the door, moving to her bathroom, the only room in the apartment with a lock. She shut herself inside, locked the door, and sat on the floor with her back against the wall, phone pressed to her ear, waiting for police to arrive. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The dispatcher kept her on the line, kept her talking, keeping her grounded. Rebecca could hear sounds from the apartment, footsteps moving slowly through the rooms, drawers opening and closing. the soft rustle of someone examining her belongings. "Police are in the building," the dispatcher said. "They're coming up now. Stay where you are. Stay quiet." Rebecca heard new sounds, heavy footsteps in the hallway outside her apartment. Police announcing themselves, the crash of her apartment door being forced open, shouting, movement, more shouting. Then a knock on the bathroom door. "Ma'am, Minneapolis PD, it's safe to come out." Rebecca opened the door with trembling hands. 2 police officers stood in her bedroom, both looking confused and concerned. Behind them, she could see more officers in the living room, searching the apartment. "Did you find them?" Rebecca asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The older officer, a woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, frowned. "Ma'am, we've searched the entire apartment. There's no one here. No signs of forced entry, no indication anyone broke in." "That's impossible. I saw someone. I heard them walking around, going through my things." The officers exchanged glances. "We believe you heard something," the male officer said carefully. "But there's no one here now. Could someone have left before we arrived?" "How?" "There's only one door, and I would have heard them leave. The door's loud. It scrapes against the frame." The police searched again more thoroughly. They checked every closet, every possible hiding place. They examined the windows, all locked from the inside. They checked the door, also locked from the inside, no signs of tampering. The security system showed no record of her door being open since then. She'd come home at 6:15 p.m. The apartment was exactly as it should be. Nothing was missing. Nothing was disturbed. No evidence that anyone had been there except Rebecca herself. After the police left, advising her to call if she heard anything else, Rebecca sat on her couch and tried to process what had happened. Had she imagined it? Was the stress of spending Christmas alone, the first holiday season after her divorce, causing her to hallucinate? But she'd heard the footsteps. She'd seen the figure. She was absolutely certain someone had been in her apartment. Rebecca didn't sleep that night. She sat in her living room with all the lights on, watching the door, jumping at every small sound. When dawn finally came, she felt exhausted and foolish. Maybe she had imagined it. Maybe the solitude had gotten to her more than she'd realized. She decided to check the building's security footage. The property management company had given all residents access to the camera system when they moved in, allowing them to review footage if needed. Rebecca logged into the system on her laptop and pulled up the recordings from Christmas night. She watched herself entering the building at 6:15 p.m. carrying a bag of groceries. She watched the empty lobby and hallways throughout the evening. No one else entered or left the building. The third-floor hallway remained empty all night. Then she switched to the camera inside her apartment, the one she'd had installed herself, positioned to watch the front door. She'd installed it after the divorce, a security measure that had made her feel safer living alone. Rebecca's blood turned to ice as she watched the footage. At 10:51 p.m., 4 minutes after she'd heard the first sound, her apartment door remained closed and locked. But inside the apartment, visible in the camera's wide-angle view, a figure moved through the living room. The same dark silhouette she'd seen through her bedroom door. The figure wasn't breaking in. It was already inside. It had been inside the entire time somehow, impossibly. Rebecca watched in horror as the figure moved slowly through her living room, examining her Christmas tree, touching the ornaments, running its fingers along her furniture. The movements were deliberate but strange, not quite human. The figure's proportions seemed wrong somehow, though Rebecca couldn't pinpoint exactly how. Too tall, maybe, or arms slightly too long, or movements too fluid. The figure approached the camera at one point, and Rebecca paused the footage, zooming in on the face. But there was no face. Just darkness. A void where features should be. Not a mask, not shadow. Just an absence of anything human. The timestamp showed 11:03 p.m. when the police entered the apartment. The figure simply vanished, not running away, not hiding. It was there one moment, and the next moment it was gone, winking out of existence as if it had never been there at all. Rebecca watched the footage 3 times, each viewing making her feel sicker. Whatever had been in her apartment wasn't human, couldn't be human. It had appeared inside a locked apartment, moved through her space, and disappeared when the police arrived. And the security footage proved she hadn't imagined it. She called the police again, asked them to come back and see the footage. 2 different officers arrived, not the ones from the night before, and Rebecca showed them the recording. They watched in silence, their expressions growing more uncomfortable with each passing second. "This has to be some kind of technical glitch," the male officer said finally. "Digital artifacts, video corruption, something like that." "But I saw it," Rebecca insisted, "with my own eyes before I ever looked at this footage. And you can see it moving. You can see it touching things." The female officer looked troubled. "Ma'am, I don't know what to tell you. What we're seeing on this video doesn't match any kind of break-in or intruder scenario I've ever encountered. If you're feeling unsafe, we can have someone from crisis response talk to you." "I'm not crazy. Something was in my apartment. Something that shouldn't exist." The officers left after taking a copy of the footage for their records. Rebecca knew they thought she'd somehow faked the video or was experiencing a mental health crisis. She could see it in their eyes, in their carefully neutral tones. Rebecca spent December 26th researching. She searched for similar experiences, for reports of shadow figures, for anything that might explain what she'd seen. She found hundreds of stories, people reporting dark figures in their homes, entities that appeared and disappeared, presences that couldn't be explained by normal means. The stories came from all over the world, spanning decades. Many of them, she noticed, occurred during holidays, Christmas especially. People alone on Christmas reporting visitors that shouldn't exist. Figures that watched them, that moved through locked spaces, that vanished when others arrived. One article from a paranormal research website caught her attention. It discussed entities the researcher called the Lonely Ones, beings that appeared to people experiencing isolation during times of communal celebration. The theory was that these entities fed on loneliness, on the specific kind of despair that comes from being alone when you're supposed to be with others. According to the article, the Lonely Ones appeared most frequently on Christmas night after the celebration ended, when the contrast between societal expectation and personal reality was sharpest. They didn't harm people physically. They just watched, studied, fed on the emotional energy of isolation and sadness. Rebecca wanted to dismiss it as nonsense, as pseudoscience and ghost stories. But she'd seen the figure. She had video evidence. And reading these accounts, she felt a sick recognition. The way the figure had moved through her apartment, examining her space with curiosity rather than malice. The way it had vanished when others arrived, as if the presence of multiple people broke whatever allowed it to manifest. She decided she couldn't stay in the apartment. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. Rebecca packed a bag and went to a hotel, choosing one that was busy and loud, full of post-Christmas travelers. She stayed there for 3 nights, until she couldn't justify the expense anymore. When she returned to her apartment on December 29th, everything seemed normal. No figures, no strange sounds, just her home, unchanged and empty. Rebecca reviewed the security footage from the nights she'd been gone. Nothing unusual. The apartment remained empty exactly as she'd left it. She tried to settle back into normal life, went back to work on December 30th, prepared for New Year's Eve, tried to convince herself that it had been a one-time event, whatever it was. Maybe the Lonely Ones only appeared once, leaving after they'd fed on whatever energy they sought. But on New Year's Eve, alone again in her apartment at 11:47 p.m., Rebecca heard the sound of footsteps in her living room. She didn't call the police this time. She knew what they'd find. Nothing. She went to check the security camera on her laptop, and there it was. The figure. Standing in exactly the same spot as Christmas night near the windows, silhouetted against the city lights. Rebecca walked out of her bedroom to confront it. She was terrified, but she was also angry. This was her home, her space, and this thing, whatever it was, kept invading it. The figure stood motionless as she approached. Up close, Rebecca could see that it had no real solidity. It was like looking at a hole in reality, a space where nothing existed. Where the figure stood, she couldn't see the windows or the city lights beyond. Just darkness. "What do you want?" Rebecca demanded, her voice shaking. The figure didn't respond, didn't move, but Rebecca felt something, not a physical sensation, but an emotional one. A wave of profound sadness washing over her. Loneliness so deep it was almost unbearable. Loss and grief and isolation compressed into a single overwhelming feeling. And she realized the figure wasn't causing her loneliness. It was made of loneliness, constructed from it, sustained by it. It existed because people like her existed. People alone during times meant for togetherness, people grieving losses, people separated from community and connection. "I'm not alone by choice," Rebecca said, tears streaming down her face. "I'm not lonely because I want to be. I'm here because my marriage ended, because my family is far away, because this is just how things worked out this year." The figure remained motionless, but Rebecca felt the emotional pressure increase. The sadness was becoming crushing, suffocating. She stumbled backward, gasping for breath that wouldn't come, drowning in feelings that weren't entirely her own. She grabbed her phone and did the only thing she could think of. She called her mother in Arizona. It was 12:53 a.m. on New Year's Day there, but she didn't care. Her mother answered, voice groggy. "Rebecca, what's wrong?" "Mom, I just needed to hear your voice. I'm sorry for calling so late, Honey, are you okay? You sound upset." Rebecca looked at where the figure had been standing. It was gone. Vanished the moment her mother's voice came through the phone, the moment she'd made a connection with another person. "I'm okay," Rebecca said, though she was crying. "I'm okay now. I just missed you. Missed everyone. I shouldn't have spent Christmas alone." They talked for 40 minutes, her mother telling her about Christmas with her brother's family, sharing stories and photos. And for those 40 minutes, Rebecca's apartment felt normal again. Warm and safe and empty in a normal way, not the heavy, oppressive emptiness that had been there before. After she hung up, Rebecca checked the security footage. The figure appeared at 11:47 p.m. and vanished at 12:53 a.m., exactly when she'd made the phone call. Its presence was directly tied to her isolation. When she connected with someone else, even just through a phone call, the entity couldn't maintain its manifestation. Rebecca moved out of the apartment in February 2020. She couldn't stay there, knowing that the figure would return whenever she was alone during significant times. She moved into a house share with 2 roommates, sacrificing privacy for the security of constant human presence. She never saw the figure again. But she knows it's still out there, appearing to others who are isolated and alone during times meant for celebration. She knows because she joined an online support group for people who've experienced similar encounters. There are dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all reporting the same thing. A dark figure that appears during holidays, during birthdays, during times when loneliness contrasts most sharply with societal expectations of togetherness. The lonely ones, they call them. Entities that feed on isolation, that manifest where sadness accumulates, that watch from the shadows of empty homes on festive nights. Rebecca never spends holidays alone anymore. She makes sure of it. even if it means joining community dinners with strangers or volunteering at shelters where others gather. Because she knows what waits in the darkness of an empty home on Christmas night. She's seen it. She's felt its presence. She's experienced the crushing weight of loneliness given form and substance. And she knows that the figure is patient. It doesn't need to appear every time. It can wait. It has endless time. All it needs is one person, alone and sad on one significant night. That's enough to sustain it. That's enough to let it manifest and feed. Rebecca often thinks about the security footage she saved from that Christmas night. She shared it with researchers, with Paranormal, investigators, with anyone who might have answers. But no one can explain it. No one can say definitively what the figure is or where it comes from. All Rebecca knows for certain is that she saw it. It was real, and it's still out there, waiting in empty apartments and houses, appearing to people who are alone when they shouldn't be. Watching them, studying them, feeding on their sadness. Christmas night isn't peaceful for Rebecca anymore. It's a time of vigilance, of making sure she's surrounded by people, of maintaining connections that keep the darkness at bay. Because she knows what happens when those connections break. She knows what manifests in the space where human warmth should be. The figure will always be there at the edges of solitude, waiting for another Christmas night, another isolated soul, another chance to emerge from whatever dimension of sadness it inhabits. And no locked door, no security system, no police response can stop it. Because the lonely ones don't break in from outside. They're already inside, hiding in the shadows of the heart, waiting for the moment when isolation becomes complete enough to give them form. And on Christmas night, when the world is supposed to be full of joy and connection, they find their strongest foothold in the spaces where those things are absent. Rebecca will never forget the feeling of that presence in her home. The weight of sadness that wasn't entirely her own. The darkness that watched her with no eyes, that moved through her space with no body, that existed because loneliness exists. And every Christmas night, she makes sure she's never alone. Because once you've seen the lonely ones, once you've felt them feed on your isolation, you understand a truth that can never be unlearned. Some horrors don't come from outside. They come from the absence of connection, from the spaces between people, from the darkness that accumulates when celebration is meant to happen but doesn't. The figure is still out there. Still appearing, still watching. And it will continue as long as people are lonely, as long as holidays emphasize the gap between expectation and reality, as long as someone somewhere spends Christmas night alone in the dark. Story 2. The Church Service. Father Michael O'Brien had been a Catholic priest for 31 years, and he'd celebrated midnight mass on Christmas Eve almost every single year of his priesthood. It was the highlight of his liturgical year, the service he prepared for most carefully, the mass that meant the most to him personally. There was something sacred about gathering at midnight to mark the moment Christmas began, to welcome the celebration of Christ's birth in the darkness before dawn. St. Catherine's Church in rural Vermont had been Father Michael's parish for the last 9 years. It was a small congregation, maybe 75 regular attendees in a town of just under 2,000 people. The church itself was historic, built in 1847. A beautiful stone structure with stained glass windows and oak pews worn smooth by generations of worshippers. Father Michael loved the building almost as much as he loved the community it served. Christmas Eve 2021 arrived with heavy snow. By 10 p.m., when Father Michael was preparing for midnight mass, nearly 8 inches had fallen and the forecast called for another 6 before morning. He worried that the weather might keep people home, but by 11:30 p.m. the parking lot was filling up. People bundled in heavy coats were making their way through the snow to the church entrance, shaking snow from their boots, greeting each other with Christmas wishes. By 11:50 p.m., Father Michael estimated nearly 100 people had arrived, more than he'd expected given the weather. The church was full of that particular energy that midnight mass always carried, anticipation and reverence mixed with the joy of celebration. The sanctuary was decorated beautifully for Christmas. Poinsettias lined the altar, pine garlands draped the pews, candles flickered in holders throughout the space. Father Michael began the service at exactly midnight, as was tradition. He processed down the center aisle, preceded by altar servers carrying candles and the processional cross. The congregation stood, joining in the opening hymn, "O come all ye faithful." Their voices filled the old church, rich and strong despite the late hour. Everything was perfectly normal through the first 15 minutes of the service. Father Michael delivered his opening prayers. The congregation responded at the appropriate times. The readings were proclaimed from the lectern. This was a service he'd celebrated dozens of times. He knew every word, every gesture, every moment. But during the gospel reading, Father Michael noticed something strange. He was reading from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 2, the familiar story of Jesus' birth. And Joseph also went up from Galilee out of the city of Nazareth into Judea unto the city of David, which is called Bethlehem. The congregation listened attentively as they always did, except for one person. In the back pew on the left side sat a man Father Michael didn't recognize. That wasn't unusual. Christmas and Easter always brought visitors, family members from out of town, people who attended church only on major holidays. But this man was staring at Father Michael with an intensity that was unsettling. Not listening to the gospel, not looking down in prayer or reflection, just staring with unblinking eyes. Father Michael tried to ignore it, continuing with the reading. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with the man in the back pew. His face was too pale, his posture too rigid, his eyes too wide and fixed. Father Michael finished the gospel and began his homily, the short sermon he'd prepared about hope and new beginnings represented by Christ's birth. But he kept glancing toward the back pew. The man hadn't moved, hadn't blinked, just continued staring. Other members of the congregation were starting to notice too. Father Michael could see heads turning, people glancing back toward the strange man, whispered conversations starting. The atmosphere in the church was changing from reverent to uneasy. Father Michael tried to regain control of the service. "Let us profess our faith," he said, beginning the Nicene Creed. The congregation joined him in the familiar words. "I believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth." But the man in the back pew spoke different words. Father Michael could hear him clearly despite the distance, despite the other voices. The man was speaking the creed backward, word for word, in perfect synchronization with the congregation but in reverse order. "Earth and heaven of Maker, Almighty Father, the God one and believe I." It shouldn't have been possible to hear one voice among 100, but Father Michael heard it clearly, and from the way people were turning around, they heard it too. Father Michael stopped speaking. The congregation faltered, voices trailing off into confused silence. The man in the back pew continued alone, still reciting the creed in reverse, his voice growing louder, echoing through the stone church. "Sir," Father Michael called out, his voice uncertain. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to—" The man stood up. Everyone in the church turned to look at him now, and Father Michael saw what had been hidden while the man was seated. He was wearing clothes from another era. Not costume clothes, but genuine period clothing. A dark suit that looked Victorian or Edwardian with a high collar and buttons that gleamed dully in the candlelight. His skin wasn't just pale, it was gray like old newspaper. His eyes were completely black, no whites visible at all. This church was built on suffering, the man said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the space. This ground is soaked in blood, and you celebrate here as if that history means nothing. Father Michael felt ice forming in his stomach. I don't know who you are, but this is a sacred service. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. I can't leave. I've never left. I've been here since the beginning, since before these stones were laid, since before your God was invited into this space. Several men in the congregation stood up, moving toward the back pew. They were going to physically remove the intruder, Father Michael realized. But before they could reach him, the man simply sat back down and bowed his head as if in prayer. The men hesitated, confused. Father Michael made a decision. He would continue the service, ignore the disruption, complete the Mass as planned. Sometimes the best response to chaos was to maintain order and structure. Let us continue, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Let us pray together. But as he spoke, he noticed something else wrong. The congregation was changing. Not all of them, but several people scattered throughout the pews. Their faces were becoming gray, their eyes darkening. They sat rigidly, staring at him with the same unblinking intensity as the man in the back. Mrs. Henderson, who'd been a member of St. Catherine's for 40 years. Now her face was gray, her eyes black, her posture rigid and wrong. Tom Carlisle, the choir director who'd helped prepare the music for tonight's service. His skin had taken on that newspaper gray color, his friendly smile replaced by something that looked like a smile but wasn't. Sarah Brennan, who taught Sunday school and always arrived early to help set up. She sat motionless, transformed into something that wore her appearance but wasn't her anymore. Father Michael counted quickly. 7 people throughout the congregation had changed. 7 people who now stared at him with black eyes, their heads all tilted at exactly the same angle, their expressions identical. The other members of the congregation were noticing too. Gasps and whispers spread through the church. People were edging away from the transformed individuals, creating gaps in the pews. Someone toward the front was crying. "What's happening?" a voice called out. "Father Michael, what's happening to them?" Father Michael didn't know. He'd been a priest for 3 decades and he'd never experienced anything like this. He'd read about possessions, about demonic manifestations, about spiritual warfare. But this was beyond his experience or understanding. The 7 transformed individuals stood up simultaneously. They moved in perfect synchronization, as if controlled by a single mind. They began to walk toward the front of the church, toward the altar, still maintaining that rigid posture, still wearing those wrong, almost smiles. "Stop!" Father Michael commanded, raising his hand. "In the name of Christ, I command you to stop." They didn't stop. They continued their slow, synchronized march down the aisles. The congregation was panicking now, people pushing past each other to get away, heading for the exits. But when the first person reached the back doors, they found them locked. The heavy wooden doors wouldn't budge despite there being no visible locks or bars. "We can't get out," someone shouted. "The doors are stuck." People tried the side doors, the door leading to the parish hall, even the door to the sacristy behind the altar. All locked, all immovable. The church had become a prison. The 7 transformed individuals reached the front of the church. They spread out across the sanctuary, positioning themselves around the altar in a formation that looked ritualistic, deliberate. They all turned to face the congregation simultaneously. The man who'd been sitting in the back pew spoke, but his voice came from all 7 mouths at once, perfectly synchronized. "This church was built to cover our altar. Your prayers were meant to sanctify ground that belongs to us. For 174 years we've been buried beneath your sanctuary, forgotten, but not gone." Father Michael's mind raced through what he knew of St. Catherine's history. The church had been built in 1847, yes, on land donated by a family named Wheeler, who'd been early settlers in the area. Before that, the land had been forest, undeveloped, or so the historical record said. "What altar?" Father Michael asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "What are you talking about?" "Before the church, there was a meeting place. Before Christianity came to these woods, there were other beliefs, other practices. The people who gathered here worshipped older gods. They made offerings. They performed rites that your religion calls evil, but which predate your faith by centuries." The seven mouths smiled in unison, and it was the most unnatural thing Father Michael had ever seen. In 1846, a preacher came to these woods. He declared our altar unholy. He gathered townspeople and destroyed it, scattered the stones, drove away the practitioners. He convinced the town council to build a church on the exact spot, to cleanse the land with Christian prayer. But you can't destroy sacred ground just by building on top of it. You can't erase faith just by declaring it evil. The altar is still here beneath your foundation. We are still here. The seven who died defending the altar. The seven who swore we would never leave, never surrender this place. Father Michael forced himself to think like a priest, not a frightened man. "If you're spirits of people who died here, then I pray for your souls. I pray that you find peace and move on to whatever comes after this life." All seven figures laughed, the sound echoing horribly through the church. "We don't want your prayers, we don't want your God, we want what was stolen from us, our altar, our sacred ground, our right to exist." "You exist in the bodies of my parishioners," Father Michael said, anger overriding his fear. "You're possessing innocent people. That's not existence, that's violation." "We're not possessing anyone, priest. We're revealing what's always been here. This church was built on our blood. Every stone in this foundation is contaminated with our presence. Every prayer spoken here has been heard by us as well as your God. And tonight, Christmas night, when the barrier between worlds is thinnest, we can finally show ourselves fully." Father Michael looked at his congregation. Nearly 90 people trapped in the church with seven entities that had been dormant for over a century and a half. People were terrified, crying, holding each other. He had to do something. He was their priest, their shepherd, their protector in spiritual matters. He walked to the altar and picked up the processional cross, the large crucifix that had been carried at the beginning of Mass. It was heavy, solid brass, blessed by the bishop when the church was consecrated. If anything had spiritual power in this building, it would be this. "I don't care what you are or what claims you have to this ground," Father Michael said, his voice growing stronger. "This is a church now. It's been consecrated, it's holy ground, and I'm ordering you to release these people and leave this place." He held up the cross, expecting, what? For the seven figures to recoil, to scream and vanish? That's what happened in movies and stories about exorcisms and spiritual warfare. But the seven figures didn't react at all. They looked at the cross with complete indifference. "Your symbols have no power over us," they said in their horrible unified voice. "We predate your cross. We predate your Christ. The altar beneath your feet is older than Christianity. It was ancient when Rome fell. Your religion is new, priest. Ours is eternal." Father Michael felt his certainty crumbling. He'd built his entire adult life on faith, on the belief that Christ's authority was absolute, that evil could be overcome through prayer and sacrament. But these entities didn't recognize that authority. They came from something older, something outside the framework of his understanding. An elderly woman in the congregation spoke up, her voice shaking but determined. "Father, in the basement, the historical documents about the church's founding. There might be something there." Father Michael remembered. The church kept archives in the basement, Old ledgers, photographs, documents dating back to the 1840s. He'd looked through them when he first arrived at St. Catherine's, but hadn't studied them in detail. "The doors are locked," someone pointed out. "We can't get to the basement." But the sacristy door behind the altar wasn't locked. Father Michael had come through it before the service. And there were stairs in the sacristy that led down to the basement. He could access the archives. "Everyone stay calm," Father Michael said, though he felt anything but calm himself. "I'm going to check the historical records. There might be information about the land before the church was built." He moved toward the sacristy, and the 7 figures didn't try to stop him. They just watched with their black eyes, their not-quite-right smiles. Father Michael descended the stairs into the church basement, fumbling for the light switch. The fluorescent lights flickered on, revealing the usual clutter of old furniture, boxes of decorations and filing cabinets containing decades of parish records. He found the oldest cabinet, the one marked 1840-1860, and pulled out the files. Most were boring administrative documents, building permits, contracts with construction companies, financial records. But there, near the bottom of the stack, was a leather-bound journal. The journal belonged to Reverend Thomas Wheeler, the preacher who'd overseen St. Catherine's construction in 1847. Father Michael flipped through the pages quickly, looking for any mention of what the entities had described. He found it in an entry dated March 15th, 1846. "Today I witnessed an abomination in the woods north of town. A group of settlers, if such godless people can be called settlers, had constructed a heathen altar of stone. I observed them performing rituals I will not describe in detail. Suffice to say, they were in direct defiance of God's law. When confronted, they claimed their practices predated Christianity, that this land was sacred to their beliefs long before the gospel reached these shores. I have convinced the town council that this altar must be destroyed and the ground consecrated for Christian worship." The heathens resisted violently. 7 of them died in the confrontation. May God have mercy on their souls despite their wickedness. "We scattered the stones of their altar and began planning for a church to be built on that exact location, so that their evil could be forever suppressed by holy ground. Construction began in April 1847. The new church will stand as a testament to God's victory over paganism. The 7 who died defending their false altar have been buried in unmarked graves on the site, beneath where the church foundation will be laid. Let their bones serve as a reminder that false gods have no power before the one true God." Father Michael felt sick. The church, his church, was literally built on top of graves, built deliberately to suppress and dominate another faith tradition. The 7 entities upstairs weren't demons or evil spirits. They were the murdered defenders of their own religious site, buried beneath the church that had been built to erase their beliefs. He brought the journal upstairs and read the passage aloud to the congregation and to the 7 figures. When he finished, there was silence in the church. "So, you admit it," the 7 voices said finally. "Your church was built through violence, through murder, through the deliberate destruction of our sacred space." "I admit that terrible things were done in 1846, Father Michael said carefully. "Things that were wrong, regardless of religious differences. People were killed for defending their beliefs. That should never have happened." "Pretty words, priest, but they don't change what this church represents. Conquest, suppression, the arrogance of believing your God supersedes all others." Father Michael took a deep breath. He'd been trained in theology, in church history, in the complexities of faith and culture, and he knew that the church's history included terrible injustices, forced conversions, cultural destruction. The story of Christianity wasn't just miracles and saints, it was also violence and domination. "You're right," he said quietly. not just about what happened here, but about the broader history. The church has often been an instrument of oppression. Its blessed conquests and validated violence against people with different beliefs. I can't undo that history. I can't bring back the 7 people who died defending this altar. Then what can you do? I can acknowledge it. I can say plainly that what happened to you was wrong, that you have a legitimate grievance, that this ground was sacred before it became a church, and that your claim to it is as valid as ours. The 7 figures stood silently, considering. Father Michael continued. But I also have to think about these people, he gestured to the terrified congregation, who have done nothing wrong, who came here tonight to celebrate their faith, not to persecute anyone. They don't deserve to be terrorized for actions taken by people who died over a century ago. Their comfort was built on our suffering, I know. And that's not fair. But continuing the cycle of harm, possessing these people, trapping everyone here, that doesn't heal anything. It just creates new suffering. Father Michael set down Reverend Wheeler's journal. I'll make you a promise. If you release these people, if you let everyone leave safely, I will dedicate myself to making sure your story is known. I'll work with the diocese to have a memorial installed, acknowledging the 7 people who died here. I'll make sure the congregation understands the full history of this land. Your faith and your altar won't be forgotten or erased anymore. The 7 figures looked at each other, somehow communicating without words despite wearing different bodies. Finally, they spoke again. Words are easy, priest. Actions matter. Then watch my actions. Judge me by what I do, not just what I say. Another long silence. Then, simultaneously, the 7 figures collapsed. Mrs. Henderson, Tom Carlyle, Sarah Brennan, and the others crumpled to the floor, unconscious but clearly themselves again. Their skin had normal color, their eyes had returned to normal. The doors of the church suddenly swung open, cold wind and snow blew in, and with it came the feeling of pressure releasing like a storm passing. The man from the back pew, or the entity that had been wearing his form, appeared before Father Michael one last time. We'll be watching, priest. If you break your promise, if you allow us to be forgotten again, we'll return. And next time, we won't be so patient. Then he vanished, simply ceased to exist in the space where he'd been standing. The church erupted in chaos. People rushed to help the 7 who'd collapsed, checking for injuries, calling for medical assistance. Father Michael worked through the confusion, making sure everyone was accounted for, that no one was seriously hurt. EMTs arrived within 20 minutes, checking the 7 who'd been possessed. Physically, they were fine. No injuries, vital signs normal. But none of them remembered anything from the moment they'd entered the church until they woke up on the floor. They'd lost over an hour of time. Father Michael kept his promise. Over the following months, he researched the history of the site exhaustively, finding records of the indigenous and settler religious practices that had existed before St. Catherine's was built. He discovered that the 7 people who died in 1846 had names: Thomas Morrison, Sarah Blackwood, James Reed, Mary Cunningham, Daniel White, Elizabeth Forrest, and Henry Green. He worked with the diocese despite resistance from church officials who wanted to avoid acknowledging uncomfortable history, to have a memorial plaque installed outside St. Catherine's. It read, "On this ground stood a sacred altar predating this church. In 1846, 7 people, Thomas Morrison, Sarah Blackwood, James Reed, Mary Cunningham, Daniel White, Elizabeth Forrest, and Henry Green, died defending their place of worship. We acknowledge their sacrifice and the violence that created this church. May all seekers of the divine find peace." The congregation was divided about the memorial. Some supported it, believing in the importance of acknowledging difficult truths. Others were angry, feeling that Father Michael was betraying the church by validating pagan beliefs. Several families left St. Catherine's to attend other parishes. But Father Michael felt he'd done the right thing. And on Christmas Eve 2022, when he celebrated midnight mass again, there were no disturbances, no strange figures, no possessions, just a normal, peaceful service. Though late that night, after everyone had gone home and Father Michael was locking up the church, he noticed something. 7 candles on the altar that he hadn't lit were burning. He approached slowly and saw that they'd been arranged in a pattern, a circle with a cross through it, a symbol he'd found in his research about the pre-Christian altar. The 7 who died defending their sacred ground were still there, still watching. But they weren't angry anymore. They'd been acknowledged, remembered, given back the dignity that had been stripped from them in 1846. Father Michael left the candles burning and whispered a prayer, not a Christian prayer, but words he'd found in the historical records about the original altar. May the old gods and the new share this ground in peace. May the dead rest, knowing they're not forgotten. The next morning, the candles had burned down completely, leaving no trace. Father Michael never saw the 7 figures again, but every Christmas Eve he lights 7 candles in their memory, acknowledging the sacred ground beneath the church, honoring the people who died there, and keeping his promise that they would never be erased or forgotten again. St. Catherine's Church still stands, still serves its community, but everyone who attends now knows the full history. They know that their sanctuary was built on blood, that the ground beneath their feet was sacred long before Christianity arrived, that their comfort and community were purchased at the cost of 7 lives. And on certain nights, especially during Christmas, people report seeing 7 figures standing at the edge of the property. Not threatening, not angry, just watching, making sure they're remembered, making sure their sacred ground is respected, making sure the promise is kept. The church and the altar coexist now, one built on top of the other, separated by stone and time, but connected by the acknowledgement of shared sacred space. It's not a comfortable truth, but it's the truth nonetheless. And Father Michael learned that Christmas night that faith is complicated, that history is messy, and that sometimes the most holy thing you can do is admit when your predecessors were wrong. The 7 who died defending their altar didn't need his prayers or his theology. They needed his honesty. They needed to be remembered. They needed someone to say simply and directly, "What happened to you was wrong." Sometimes that's all spirits want. Sometimes that's all anyone wants, to be acknowledged, to be remembered, to have their suffering recognized rather than buried beneath the foundations of someone else's glory. Story 3. The Christmas Gift. Denise Hartley thought she'd found the perfect Christmas gift for her 8-year-old daughter, Madison. It was an antique music box, beautifully crafted from dark wood with intricate inlay work on the lid. The interior was lined with faded red velvet, and when you wound the key on the side, a delicate ballerina figure spun slowly while the mechanism played the Nutcracker Suite. Madison had been obsessed with ballet for the past year, and Denise knew this vintage treasure would be treasured far more than any modern toy. She'd found it at an estate sale in Salem, Massachusetts on December 20th, 2018. The house was being cleared out after the death of the owner, an elderly woman named Evelyn Marsh, who'd lived alone for the past 30 years after her husband's death. The music box had been sitting on a dresser in what must have been a child's bedroom, though the room looked like it hadn't been used in decades. Dust covered everything, and the air had that stale quality of spaces sealed off for years. "How much for the music box?" Denise had asked the estate sale coordinator, a tired-looking woman with a clipboard. "Everything in this room is 50% off. Tag says $20, so $10. Denise could hardly believe her luck. Antique music boxes like this typically sold for hundreds of dollars. She examined it carefully. The mechanism worked perfectly. The wood was in excellent condition aside from some minor scratches, and the ballerina figure was intact. A steal at $10. "Does it have any history?" Denise asked. "I mean, was it a family heirloom or anything?" The coordinator shrugged. "All I know is it came from this room. Ms. Marsh didn't have any children, so I'm not sure why she had a child's room. Maybe for grandnieces or grandnephews visiting. Nobody from the family wanted any of this stuff, which is why we're selling it." Denise paid and took the music box home, already imagining Madison's face when she opened it on Christmas morning. She cleaned it carefully, polishing the wood until it gleamed, making sure the mechanism was fully wound. She wrapped it in silver paper with a red bow and placed it under the tree, the biggest box there. Impossible to miss. Christmas morning arrived. Denise woke at 6:47 a.m. to Madison jumping on her bed, thrilled and eager to open presents. Denise's husband, Robert, got up groggily, and the three of them went downstairs to the living room where their Christmas tree stood, surrounded by gifts. Madison went through her presents with the explosive excitement unique to 8-year-olds. Dolls, games, art supplies, books. She loved everything. But when she opened the music box, her reaction was different. She lifted the lid, listened to the music, watched the ballerina spin. Then she closed it quickly and set it aside, moving on to the next present without comment. "Don't you like it, sweetie?" Denise asked, confused. She'd been so sure this would be the favorite gift. Madison shrugged. "It's okay. It's pretty." But Denise noticed her daughter kept glancing at the music box throughout the morning, and her expression wasn't excitement. It was something closer to unease. Later that afternoon, after the present opening frenzy had calmed and they were cleaning up wrapping paper, Madison came to Denise. "Mom, can I ask you something about the music box?" "Of course, honey. What is it?" "Where did you get it?" "At an estate sale." "Why?" Madison bit her lip, that telltale sign that she wanted to say something but wasn't sure if she should. "It's just, when I opened it and listened to the music, I heard something else, like someone whispering, under the music." Denise felt a flutter of concern. "Whispering? What were they saying?" "I couldn't understand it. It was too quiet, but it was definitely a voice, a kid's voice, I think." "Sweetie, old music boxes sometimes make strange sounds. The mechanisms get worn and the metal parts can create weird noises. It wasn't whispering. It was just the gears." But Madison looked unconvinced. Denise decided to test it herself. She went to Madison's room where her daughter had taken the music box and wound the key. The mechanism engaged and the Nutcracker Suite began to play, the ballerina spinning gracefully. Denise listened carefully. Just the music. No whispering, no voices, just the slightly tinny sound of the old mechanical music box, exactly as it should be. "See?" Denise said, smiling at Madison. "Just the music, nothing strange." "You don't hear it?" Madison asked, looking genuinely puzzled. "No, honey, there's nothing to hear. It's a beautiful music box, and I think once you get used to it, you'll love it." But Madison never warmed to the gift. Over the next few days between Christmas and New Year's, the music box sat on her dresser, untouched. Denise wound it a few times herself, enjoying the delicate music and the spinning ballerina, trying to demonstrate to Madison that there was nothing wrong with it. On the night of December 29th, Denise was woken by a sound, music, faint but clear, coming from somewhere in the house. She checked her phone, 2:34 a.m. She got out of bed carefully, trying not to wake Robert, and followed the sound. It was coming from Madison's room. The music box was playing, even though Denise knew it hadn't been wound. Those old mechanical music boxes couldn't play on their own. They required the key to be turned, tension to be created in the spring mechanism. Yet, the Nutcracker Suite was playing clearly from behind Madison's closed door. Denise opened the door slowly. The room was dark except for the nightlight near Madison's bed. The music box sat on the dresser, its lid open, the ballerina spinning slowly. And Madison was standing in front of it, perfectly still, staring at the dancing figure. "Madison? Honey, what are you doing up?" Her daughter didn't respond. She just continued staring at the music box, her expression blank, as if she were sleepwalking. Denise approached and gently touched Madison's shoulder. "Sweetie, you should be in bed." Madison spoke without looking away from the music box. "She wants me to listen. She's been trying to tell me something important. But I have to be very quiet and listen very carefully." "Who wants you to listen?" "The girl in the music box." Chills ran down Denise's spine. "There's no girl in the music box, honey, just the ballerina figure. It's just a toy." "No." Madison's voice was flat, emotionless. "There's a girl. Her name is Carolyn. She's been in the music box for a long time. She's lonely. She wants someone to play with." Denise closed the music box firmly, cutting off the music mid-note. The abrupt silence was jarring. Madison blinked, seemed to wake up from whatever trance she'd been in, and looked around, confused. "Mom, what's happening? Why am I out of bed?" "You were sleepwalking, I think. Come on, let's get you back to sleep." Denise tucked Madison back into bed, but she couldn't shake the feeling of wrongness. The music box shouldn't have been playing. Madison shouldn't have been standing there in that trance-like state. And that name, Caroline, where had that come from? The next morning, Denise decided to research the music box's history. She contacted the estate sale company and got the contact information for Evelyn Marsh's nephew, who'd been handling the estate. She called him, explaining that she'd bought the music box and was curious about its background. "I don't know much about it," the nephew said. "Aunt Evelyn kept that room locked for as long as I can remember. She never talked about it. After she died and we were going through the house, we found that room was basically a shrine to some little girl. Toys, clothes, photos. But Aunt Evelyn never had children, and as far as I know, she never had any kids living with her." "Were there photos? Could you tell who the girl was?" "Just one photo that I remember. A little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, in a ballet outfit. Written on the back was Caroline, Christmas 1963. That's all I know." Denise thanked him and hung up. Caroline, the same name Madison had mentioned. But how could Madison have known that name? She couldn't have seen the photo. It hadn't been with the music box, and Denise certainly hadn't mentioned it. Denise tried to find more information about Caroline and Evelyn Marsh, searching online for any news articles or records. She found Evelyn's obituary, which mentioned she'd been a school teacher who never married and lived alone. But digging deeper through old newspaper archives, Denise found something else. A news article from January 1964. The headline read, "Local girl missing, presumed dead." The story described how Caroline Marsh, age 8, had disappeared on Christmas night 1963. She'd gone to bed in her room and had simply vanished by morning. Her parents, Robert and Evelyn Marsh, had reported her missing. There was a massive search, but no trace of Caroline was ever found. The article included a photo, a little girl in a ballet outfit smiling at the camera, the same photo the nephew had mentioned. Denise felt sick. Caroline Marsh was Evelyn's daughter, but the obituary had said Evelyn never had children. Why would that be? Why would Evelyn's own family not know she'd had a daughter? More searching revealed the answer. 6 months after Carolyn's disappearance, Robert Marsh died by suicide. Evelyn had a mental breakdown and was hospitalized for 2 years. When she was released, she returned to her home but never spoke of Caroline or Robert again. She'd sealed off Caroline's room and refused to acknowledge her daughter had ever existed. The trauma had been so severe that she'd essentially erased that part of her life, but she'd kept the music box. Caroline's favorite toy, according to one of the news articles. The little girl had loved ballet and would spend hours watching the ballerina spin while she practiced her dance moves. Denise should have gotten rid of the music box immediately. She knew that, but she felt paralyzed by uncertainty. What if Madison was right? What if there was something of Caroline trapped in the music box? Could she just throw it away? Destroy it, without knowing for sure? That night, December 30th, Denise couldn't sleep. She lay in bed listening to the quiet sounds of the house, worrying about the music box. Around 1:15 a.m., she heard it again. Music. The same tune, the Nutcracker Suite, playing faintly from Madison's room. Denise got up immediately and went to check on her daughter. Madison was out of bed again, standing in front of the music box, staring at the spinning ballerina. But this time, something was different. The ballerina figure had changed. It was no longer the delicate porcelain dancer Denise had seen before. It was a little girl, a real little girl, impossibly small, spinning inside the music box with mechanical movements, her tiny face twisted in a silent scream. Denise grabbed the music box and slammed the lid shut. Madison collapsed and Denise caught her before she hit the floor. She carried her daughter to bed, Madison mumbling incoherently about Caroline wanting her to stay, about how it was lonely in the music box, about how she needed a friend. Denise grabbed the music box and took it downstairs, her hands shaking. She should destroy it, smash it, burn it. But something stopped her. Some superstitious fear that destroying the box might trap Caroline's spirit permanently. Or worse, might release something that shouldn't be released. She called her sister, Paula, who'd always been interested in supernatural things, who'd read books about hauntings and possessions. Paula arrived within 30 minutes. She lived only 2 towns over, and Denise showed her the music box, explained everything that had happened. Paula examined it carefully, opening the lid. The ballerina was back to normal, just a porcelain figure, nothing sinister. The music played normally, but Paula's expression was grave. "This needs to be properly dealt with," Paula said. "Not destroyed, but cleansed and contained. There's a woman I know, someone who works with haunted objects. She's helped me before with items I've encountered. Let me call her." The woman, whose name was Margaret, arrived the following morning, December 31st. She was in her 70s with kind eyes and an air of absolute competence. She examined the music box without touching it directly, using tools to open it and inspect the mechanism. "There's definitely a presence attached to this object," Margaret said finally. "A child's spirit, confused and frightened, bound to the music box through trauma. This happened decades ago from what I can sense. The child disappeared while playing with this box or while the box was playing. Her spirit became attached, trapped between worlds." "Can you help her?" Denise asked. "Can you free her?" "I can try, but you need to understand, spirits that have been trapped this long don't always want to leave. The music box has become their reality. Leaving means facing whatever comes next, and that can be terrifying." Margaret performed what she called a release ritual. She set up candles around the music box, burned sage and other herbs, spoke in a language Denise didn't recognize. She opened the music box and let the music play while she worked, her voice rising and falling in rhythm with the mechanical tune. At exactly midnight, New Year's Eve turning into New Year's Day, the music box suddenly stopped mid-note. The ballerina froze in mid-spin, and in the candlelight, Denise saw a shimmer in the air above the music box. The faint outline of a little girl, translucent and flickering, standing where no one should be. The spirit girl looked at Denise, then at Margaret, then at the music box. Her expression was confused, frightened. She looked like she'd just woken from a long sleep and didn't know where she was. Margaret spoke gently. "Caroline, You've been trapped for a very long time. 55 years. Your mother never forgot you. She kept your room exactly as it was. She kept this music box, but now she's gone too, and it's time for you to go as well. Time to move on to wherever children go when they leave this world. The spirit girl shook her head, backing away. She pointed at the music box, then made a gesture like she was winding the key. You want to stay in the music box? Margaret asked. It's all you know, isn't it? When you disappeared that Christmas night in 1963, you somehow became bound to this object. It's been your home, your prison, your entire existence. The spirit nodded. But you can't stay. You're pulling on the living, on Madison, on anyone who listens to the music. You're trying to find companionship, trying not to be alone. But in doing so, you're hurting people. You're pulling children into your loneliness. Margaret reached out slowly, her hand hovering near where the spirit girl stood. I know you're scared. I know the unknown is terrifying. But staying here, trapped in this music box, hurting children who just want to enjoy a toy, that's not existing. That's just endless suffering. The spirit girl started to cry, silent tears that Denise could somehow see despite the figure being translucent. Your mother loved you, Margaret continued. She never stopped loving you. She never stopped mourning you. And now she's on the other side, wherever that is. Don't you think she might be waiting for you? Don't you want to find out? The spirit girl looked at the music box one last time, then back at Margaret. She nodded slowly. Margaret continued her ritual, her voice stronger now, more insistent. The candles flickered wildly despite there being no breeze. The temperature in the room dropped suddenly. And the spirit girl began to fade, becoming less substantial, less visible until she was just a faint shimmer in the air. Then she was gone. The music box suddenly started playing again on its own, one last time, but the music sounded different, lighter, happier, like a goodbye rather than a plea for help. It played through the Nutcracker Suite completely, the ballerina spinning gracefully, and when the music ended, Denise heard something. A child's voice, barely audible, saying, "Thank you." Then silence, complete silence. Margaret examined the music box again. She's gone. The presence is gone. This is just an object now, no longer haunted. Denise took the music box and, despite Margaret's assurance that it was safe, decided she couldn't keep it. She couldn't give it to Madison, couldn't risk any residual energy or attachment. She contacted Evelyn Marsh's nephew again and explained what had happened. Most of it anyway, leaving out the parts about spirits and rituals that might make her sound insane. I think this music box should be buried with your aunt, Denise said. It belonged to her daughter, and I think it should stay in the family. Would that be possible? The nephew was confused but agreeable. Evelyn had been cremated, and her ashes were going to be scattered at a place she'd loved. He agreed to include the music box in a small memorial service. On January 15, 2019, Denise attended the service. Evelyn's ashes were scattered, and the music box was buried in a small plot with a simple marker that read, Caroline Marsh, 1955-1963, Forever Dancing. Madison never asked about the music box after that night. It was as if she'd forgotten it entirely, despite how much the presence had affected her. She went back to her normal, cheerful self, interested in ballet but not obsessed, sleeping soundly through the nights. But Denise never forgot. She learned her lesson about buying antique items without knowing their history, about objects that can carry trauma and bind spirits, about the dangers of gifts that seem too good to be true. She often thinks about Caroline, trapped for 55 years in a music box, lonely and frightened, trying desperately to find companionship by pulling other children into her prison. She hopes that Margaret was right, that Caroline found peace, that maybe she even found her mother Evelyn on the other side. and she hopes that Caroline is finally, after decades of mechanical spinning and repeated music, free to dance however she wants, wherever she is now, no longer trapped in a box, no longer bound to an object, just a child again, free and whole and at peace. Denise never bought another antique gift. The risk was too great, the potential for unknown history too dangerous, because some objects carry more than just memories. Some objects carry pieces of souls, fragments of lives interrupted, spirits trapped by trauma and circumstance. And sometimes, a perfect Christmas gift can be the most dangerous thing you bring into your home.